Close your eyes for a moment. Let the world around you quiet down. The weight of the day can slip from your shoulders now. Breathe slowly, deeply, as if the night itself is wrapping you in calm. You are safe here, listening to a story that drifts across time, carried by whispers of struggle, ambition, and fate. Tonight I will take you somewhere far away, into the life of a man who began with nothing certain, nothing promised. A man whose path was carved not from privilege, but from exile, hardship, and shadows. His journey was not smooth nor gentle. It was marked by betrayal, humiliation, and the kind of silence that presses down like stone. Yet through that silence, something else was born, a will so unyielding that nothing could break it. And as you sink deeper into relaxation, let the story unfold. It is a story told in my own voice. I will not tell you who I am just yet. That is for later, when the truth carries its proper weight. For now, listen closely, and let each word guide you gently towards sleep. I was born in Beijing in 1953, into a house where power was both a birthright and a curse, in a time when the world around me was shifting like sand. My family name was once spoken with respect. My father, a man of revolution, had stood alongside the great leaders of his time. For a while, his presence commanded loyalty and admiration. But in my country, power is never permanent, and loyalty is a currency that devalues quickly. One day, his name was a shield. The next, it was a curse. I remember being very young when the walls of our home no longer felt secure. Neighbors who once greeted us with warmth turned their eyes away. Friends vanished. My father was accused of sins he had not committed, denounced in the bitter storms of politics. My mother was humiliated in public, and I, their child, was marked, not for who I was, but for the blood that ran in my veins. There is a certain sting in being told as a boy that you are guilty by birth. Officials dragged me into rooms, questioning me as if I carried secrets I could not possibly know. Their voices thundered, demanding confessions of things I never did. I learned then that truth had little weight when power decided otherwise. And I also learned something else, that to endure one must become small, invisible, silent. When I was 15, silence was not enough. They came for me as they came for so many others. I was sent down, as they called it, exiled to the countryside for re-education through labor. My new home was not the capital city, not the halls of study, but a cave dwelling in Shanxi, carved from the earth itself. Imagine a boy born into privilege, suddenly living among mud and dust, his hands blistered from shoveling dung, his body bent under the weight of water buckets. That was me. Each morning I woke to the call of labor. The air smelled of soil and sweat, of animals and smoke. Hunger was my constant companion. My clothes grew ragged, my skin cracked, my body ached. Villagers looked at me not with respect, but with doubt. The son of a fallen man, they whispered. To them, I was finished before I had even begun. But the earth has its own way of teaching. Every stone I lifted, every field I tended, hardened me. Every humiliation carved something sharper within me. And in the long nights as I lay on a simple bed of straw, I made a promise to myself. I would endure. I would bend but never break. There were times when the despair felt heavier than the soil I carried. Many who were sent down lost themselves to bitterness. Some never returned at all. But in that harsh land I found a strange clarity. Hardship is an instructor like no other. It strips you bare, forces you to see who you are when nothing is left. I was young, but I already knew. If I could survive this, I could survive anything. Still, survival alone was not enough. I longed for redemption, for a path back into the world that had cast me out. I sought to join the party that had branded my family disgraced. Each application was a test of patience, and each rejection a reminder of the shadow that followed my name. 7 times I was denied. 7 times I swallowed the rejection like bitter medicine. But on the 8th attempt, something shifted. They accepted me. That moment was not a gift. It was my victory. In the very land where they had sent me to vanish, I was reborn. The party that had once scorned me became the vessel of my return, and deep within I knew that this was only the beginning. In those years I learned that silence could be more powerful than words. I let others think me simple, unremarkable. I did what was asked of me without complaint. To them I seemed ordinary, perhaps even dull. But that was the mask I chose to wear. For beneath the mask I was watching, remembering, and preparing. People underestimate the quiet. They dismiss those who do not boast, who do not clamor for attention. But silence hides fire. Silence allows one to move unseen, to gather strength without interference. The villagers thought I was just another boy, hardened by labor, resigned to obscurity. They did not know I was sharpening myself like a blade kept sheathed until the moment it is needed. And so when I left the countryside, I carried no bitterness on my face, though it lived deep in my bones. I returned to the world wearing patience like armor. I took postings in provinces few cared about, remote towns, forgotten corners. Others thought it was exile still, a slow death of ambition, but I knew better. The periphery is where power sleeps quietly. It is where one learns without being watched. Looking back, I see clearly. The mud of Shanxi was my crucible. The hunger, the rejection, the silence. These were my teachers. They gave me resilience that no rival could strip away. They gave me a shield no betrayal could pierce. And though no one then could have imagined it, the boy who lived in a cave, who shoveled dung and carried buckets across barren fields, was already preparing for something greater, because hardship had taught me a secret. To endure is to conquer, and in time the world would know just how far endurance could carry me. But that was only the beginning. When I returned from the countryside, I did not step back into a world that welcomed me with open arms. The shadows of my past still clung to me. To many, I was still the son of a disgraced man, someone whose fate should have been sealed long ago. But I wore those shadows like a second skin. They no longer frightened me. I had learned how to live with them, even to use them. The party accepted me, yes, but acceptance was not trust. Not yet. If I were to rise, I would need to do so quietly, patiently, and in places where few were watching. I understood that the center of power was crowded, filled with ambitious men eager to outshine one another. The spotlight was dangerous. It burned too hot, too fast. I chose another path. I went where others did not want to go. Hebei, Fujian, Zhejiang. Names that stirred little excitement in the political heart of the country. To some, these were backwaters, unimportant provinces far from the gaze of Beijing. But I saw them differently. They were laboratories of patience. They were places where a man could learn how to govern without drawing the envy of rivals. In Hebei, I learned the first lesson of leadership. People will follow competence long before they follow charisma. The villagers and workers did not care about the intricacies of ideology. They cared about whether their food was on the table, whether their roads were repaired, whether their children had a chance to study. I walked their villages, listened to their complaints, solved their small problems. These were not grand gestures, but they built something far stronger than applause. They built trust. In Fujian, I learned the second lesson. Corruption eats away at a nation like rot in wood. I saw officials lining their pockets while ordinary families struggled. I understood then why purges and crackdowns had become necessary tools of survival. To remove corruption was not simply about morality, it was about consolidating power, proving loyalty, and clearing the path of rivals who might one day strike. I watched carefully, noting who bent the rules, who looked the other way, who thought themselves untouchable. Their arrogance became my map. And in Zhejiang, I found the third lesson. Appearances are everything. The province was a hub of business, trade, and energy. Here, officials and entrepreneurs alike valued efficiency and results. I learned to present myself as the reliable one, the steady hand. I was not the loudest, nor the most flamboyant. I let others boast, let them draw attention to themselves. Meanwhile, I delivered results, quietly, consistently. Over time, results become a shield. Few question the man who solves problems, even if they do not fully trust him. Still, whispers followed me. Some said I was too quiet, too ordinary, too safe to ever matter in the larger scheme of politics. They did not understand that was exactly the mask I wished to wear. Quiet men are ignored until the moment they strike. Ordinary men are overlooked until the day they prove extraordinary. And through these years, I watched as others rushed upward, grasping for titles and recognition. Many of them rose quickly. Many of them fell just as quickly. Politics, I learned, devours the impatient. I was never impatient. I was building something slower, deeper, stronger. At times, even I wondered if the path I had chosen was too obscure. In forgotten corners, in provincial offices, I sometimes felt the weight of invisibility. Was I truly climbing, or was I being left behind? But then I remembered the fields of Shanxi, the endless labor, the rejection stamped on my applications. Survival had already taught me that endurance outlasts brilliance. And so I waited even when the climb seemed endless. It was not always easy. In Fujin, I faced storms, both literal and political. Natural disasters tested my ability to respond swiftly, to calm panic and restore order. Political undercurrents threatened to sweep me away as rival factions vied for influence. Each crisis was an examination, a chance to prove whether I was steady or fragile. I treated every challenge as if it were the deciding test of my career. To falter once could mean being forgotten forever. In Zhejiang, as the economy surged, I embraced modernization while maintaining caution. I spoke of reform without speaking too boldly. I encouraged growth but reminded everyone of discipline. Balance. Always balance. Too much change, and one risks rebellion. Too little, and one risks stagnation. I walked the line carefully, every step measured, every word chosen with precision. And then, opportunities began to appear. Whispers from the center reached even the provinces. They said my name in meetings where decisions were made. They noted my patience, my ability to avoid scandal, my record of stability. I was not flashy, not threatening, but dependable. In politics, sometimes that is more dangerous than ambition, for I had learned another truth. Power does not only belong to the bold, it belongs to the survivor, the one who endures while others destroy themselves. And so, piece by piece, province by province, I carved a path from obscurity toward the heart of the party. But I never forgot the silence of my youth. I never forgot the humiliation of being cast out, the endless rejections, the mud and hunger of the countryside. They remained with me like ghosts, reminding me that everything could be taken away in an instant. Perhaps that is why I governed cautiously, always watching, always calculating. Trust was a currency I spent sparingly. Some who observed me in those years thought me safe, even dull. They believed I was destined to remain a provincial official, a man of competence but not of greatness. They could not see the fire that still burned beneath the surface. They could not know that every quiet year was another brick in the foundation of something larger. And so, while others grasped at immediate glory, I continued my quiet ascent. I let them believe I was forgettable. I let them believe I was ordinary. All the while I was preparing, because deep within I knew the truth. The boy who had lived in exile, who had survived humiliation and hunger, was not destined to fade. He was destined to return to the center. And when that moment came, it would not be gradual. It would be decisive. But that moment had not yet arrived. For now I was still climbing, still waiting, still gathering strength in the unknown corners of the nation. And those who thought me invisible would one day discover how dangerous invisibility can be. Power has a way of testing loyalty. It seduces, corrupts, and exposes. I saw it in every province, in every office I passed through. Men who swore oaths in the morning broke them by dusk. Officials who promised service to the people instead served their own pockets. The rot was everywhere, silent, creeping, infecting the very bones of the party. I had known humiliation. I had known exile. I had tasted hunger and carried the weight of rejection. That past was carved into me. Perhaps that is why I recognized corruption for what it was. Not only a moral failing, but a weakness that could consume a nation. And so, when I reached higher ground, when I had a platform wide enough to act, I sharpened my past into a weapon. I called it a campaign, a cleansing. Others would later give it names, and tigers and flies, they said, because no one was too high or too low to escape its reach. But for me, it was something more personal. It was proof. Proof that no one, no rival, no enemy, no official in silk robes or generals in gilded uniforms could believe themselves untouchable. When I moved suddenly. Officials who had thought themselves secure for decades were summoned overnight. Their wealth, their power, their networks, none of it shielded them. Some tried to flee, others begged for mercy. But mercy was not part of the lesson. The lesson was loyalty, discipline, fear. The people cheered. To them it was justice. For too long they had watched arrogance grow fat while ordinary families struggled. They saw me as the hand that swept away the rot, the man who dared strike where others had only whispered. Their approval was not why I did it, but it was useful. Every applause gave me cover to strike harder, to dig deeper. Inside the party, fear spread like wildfire. Those who once dismissed me as quiet, as unremarkable, now lowered their voices when my name was spoken. They wondered who might be next, whether their own secrets would surface, whether their allies could still be trusted. Suspicion divided them. While they looked over their shoulders, I moved forward. But the campaign was never just about corruption. It was about consolidation. It was about removing rivals with the blessing of the people. A rival disgraced is a rival erased. And once erased, their networks collapse, their influence withers, their legacy is rewritten. I chose my targets carefully. Each move sent a message. A powerful military commander brought down, "The army is no refuge." A governor stripped of title? No province is beyond reach. Even the smallest cadres punished. No one is invisible. And in this storm, I remained calm, unflinching. Outwardly, I spoke of morality, of justice, of cleansing the party. Inwardly, I knew what it truly meant: control. To lead a nation of such size, such hunger, such ambition, one cannot merely guide. One must command. Yet I also understood the danger. Strike too softly and the rot festers. Strike too harshly and the system cracks. Balance, always balance. Each punishment weighed against its consequence, each removal calculated like pieces on a chessboard. The goal was not destruction. The goal was obedience. There were nights when even I felt the weight of it. Reports stacked on my desk, names of men who once dined at my table, who once smiled in my presence. Now they were accused, investigated, erased. Sometimes I wondered, had they always been corrupt, or had power itself corrupted them? But in the end, the question did not matter. What mattered was that their fall strengthened me, and through me, the party. Still, whispers arose. Some called me ruthless. Some said I was purging not corruption, but competition. Rumors swirled in quiet corners that I had turned the knife inward not to cleanse, but to conquer. Perhaps they were right. But in politics, perception is often more powerful than truth. If the people saw justice, then justice it was. And so the campaign grew. Tigers fell. Flies were swatted. The old guard, once untouchable, found themselves trapped. One by one, the pillars of resistance collapsed, and in their place, I stood unchallenged, my authority reaching into every corridor, every barrack, every provincial hall. The party became my shield, the people my chorus, and those who once doubted whether I would ever matter now watched in silence as I rewrote the rules. But deep inside, I never forgot what drove me. I remembered the cave in Shanxi, the hunger, the mud, the sting of rejection. Corruption was not an abstract idea to me. It was betrayal. Betrayal of trust, betrayal of sacrifice, betrayal of those who carried burdens without reward. And betrayal demands punishment. Some thought the campaign would fade, that it was a temporary blaze meant to frighten. They did not understand. This was not a season of cleansing. This was the beginning of a new order. And with every rival removed, with every office brought under discipline, I came closer to something larger, something more dangerous, the power to break rules and the will to rewrite them. But that was the next step. Every system of power has its boundaries, rules that define what can be done, how long one may rule, when it is time to step aside. On paper, such rules are written to protect stability. They reassure those beneath the throne that leadership will not last forever, that renewal will come with the turning of years. But rules are fragile things. They are not iron walls. They are paper screens, and paper can be torn. When I first began my climb into the highest corridors of power, I observed carefully how those rules worked. Term limits, succession orders, unwritten agreements, all designed to give the illusion of balance. Men rose, men retired, and the cycle repeated. Yet I saw through the illusion. Beneath the surface there was no balance, only competition disguised as order. Each transition was another battlefield, each retirement another gamble that the successor would not undo what came before. I asked myself, if the purpose of leadership is to secure the nation, then why must leaders surrender it when their hands are still steady? If the purpose of rules is to preserve strength, then why should rules weaken the very leader who has proven unshakable? I had already cleansed the party of corruption, or so it appeared. Rivals had been removed, resistance was scattered, yet the rules still remained, looming like an invisible ceiling above me. They were not designed for me, but for those who feared a leader might become too strong. And in that they were right. To remain bound by those rules would mean placing my fate in the hands of others, trusting that when my time was declared finished, the path I had carved would not be undone. But I knew better than to trust in others. I had seen loyalty evaporate, seen oaths break like glass. Why should I believe the future would be any different? So I did what others dared not do. I placed my hands on the paper screen and tore it down. The announcement came in calm words, spoken with simplicity, framed as continuity rather than upheaval. The limits on leadership, the restrictions on how long one could remain were erased. Just like that, the invisible ceiling was gone. Some were stunned into silence. Others whispered that it was unthinkable, that no one had broken such rules in decades. But once the paper was torn, they had no choice but to accept what was left behind. Outwardly, I framed it as duty. I spoke of service, of continuity, of ensuring that reforms and stability could not be disrupted by premature change. Inwardly, I knew it was something more: survival. To step down would be to gamble with everything I had built, and I do not gamble with survival. The people, many of them, accepted it with calm. Some even welcomed it. They remembered the corruption that had been cut down, the stability restored, the promises of strength. For them, my continuation was reassurance. But among the elites, the fear deepened. If I could erase one rule, what else could I erase? If the ceiling was gone, then what walls remained? And this was the lesson I wanted them to learn. Rules are not immutable. They exist only as long as power chooses to honor them. And I no longer needed to honor them. There were those who thought this move reckless, that it would stir too much attention, too much suspicion. But suspicion is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the very thing that keeps rivals frozen. Better they fear me too strong than believe me vulnerable. Still, I knew the risks. A leader who discards limits invites comparison with the past, with others who once held power without end. My name began to echo alongside shadows of history, comparisons drawn in hushed tones. Some dared to say it aloud, others only thought it silently. They wondered whether I was building not just authority, but a cult of personality, a return to something the world had believed gone forever. Perhaps they were right. But I had already learned that survival demands sacrifice. To keep the nation on course, to keep rivals from tearing at the fabric of power, I had to be more than a leader bound by rules. I had to be the rule itself. And so, with each year that passed, the structure bent further toward me. My words became guidance. My thoughts became doctrine. Speeches were no longer just policy. They were studied as philosophy, repeated in classrooms, etched into texts. It was no longer enough for me to lead. I had to be believed in. The paradox of power is that it demands both distance and closeness. Too distant, and the people forget you. Too close, and they grow restless. I sought a balance. I allowed them to see me, to hear me, to repeat my name with reverence. But I kept enough shadow to remain untouchable. A leader cannot be ordinary. He must be seen as something more, something necessary, something inevitable. When the rules fell, so did the illusion of succession. I was no longer a tenant in the halls of leadership. I was its foundation. Others might still hold titles beside me, but they knew and I knew that their roles existed at my discretion. And though I did not reveal it openly, this was the moment when I no longer feared the cycle of politics. I had outlived it, broken it, reshaped it. The path ahead was no longer defined by the years written on paper. It was defined only by how long I chose to walk it. But the world was watching. Beyond my nation's borders, whispers grew louder. They called me ambitious, ruthless, even dangerous. They spoke of a new era, an uncertain future. Perhaps they hoped to predict my downfall, to imagine an end where none had yet appeared. I let them whisper. Because I knew something they did not. The boy who once lived in exile, who shoveled dung in a cave and survived humiliation, had already proven he could endure beyond limits. And if he could endure there, why should limits stop him here? The rules were broken, and once broken, they could never be restored. What remained now was a new question, not whether I could rule without end, but what I would choose to do with such power. And that question would define not only me, but the future. Power cannot last without force behind it. Words alone do not guard the throne. Promises do not shield against betrayal. To rule a nation of 1 billion souls, one must command not only obedience, but the instruments of obedience, the army, the guardians of the state. I had watched others before me falter when their grip on the military loosened. Some believed loyalty could be purchased with favor, with wealth, with honorific titles. They were mistaken. Loyalty that is bought can also be sold. What I needed was something stronger. I needed to ensure that the men who carried the guns, who commanded divisions, who watched over the borders, understood that their survival was tied directly to mine. The army, in its vastness, had become entangled with corruption just like the party. Generals who thought themselves beyond reach, officers who lived in luxury, while soldiers under them tightened their belts. I could not allow that decay to continue. If corruption was a sickness in the party, it was a cancer in the army. Left unchecked, it would consume the marrow of power itself. So I began with a knife. One by one, senior figures were removed. Some were charged with crimes, embezzlement, abuse of position, disloyalty. Others simply disappeared from their posts, swallowed by silence. Their names, once spoken with fear, became warnings whispered in the dark. I called it discipline. Others called it purging. Perhaps both were true. When a general fell, the message was clear. Rank would not protect you. Years of service would not protect you. Even proximity to me would not protect you if trust was broken. The soldiers saw their leaders dragged down, and in that spectacle, they understood the lesson. Loyalty was no longer optional. It was survival. And yet, it was not just fear I wanted to instill. Fear alone can breed resentment. What I offered alongside fear was clarity. The army knew where I stood. They knew my expectations. They knew that corruption would no longer be tolerated, that arrogance would no longer be excused. Some trembled at this, others welcomed it. For beneath the generals, beneath the gilded uniforms, there were men who longed for order, who despised the rot that had spread unchecked. To them, my discipline was not tyranny, but restoration. Still, I knew suspicion lingered. Some whispered that I was dismantling the old guard to build a military of my own making. They were not wrong. I did not deny it, even to myself. I wanted an army that did not serve itself, but served me and through me the nation. To bind them closer, I visited their ranks, stood among the soldiers, wore the same fatigues. I let them see me not only as a distant figure, but as a commander who walked the same ground, breathed the same dust. These appearances were carefully crafted, yes, but they mattered. Symbols matter. In politics, in power, in war, symbols often outlive men. Over time, my control deepened. Generals who survived the purge became fiercely loyal, not because they loved me, but because they feared the alternative. They knew what had happened to those who faltered. They knew obedience was their shield, discipline their lifeline. Yet with every purge, every removal, I felt the balance tilt further toward me. The army no longer stood apart from my authority. It was woven into it, inseparable. I did not need to ask whether they would follow. I knew they would. But there is always danger in such dominance. Too much fear can crack the foundation. Too much obedience can dull the edge of initiative. I walked carefully, ensuring that while they bent to me, they still believed themselves guardians of the nation, protectors of its strength. They could never suspect they were, in truth, protectors of me. Whispers outside my borders grew louder. Observers called my actions ruthless, even dangerous. They spoke of vanished generals, of sudden reshuffles, of men who once commanded divisions now stripped of rank, their names erased. They wondered if I was preparing for something larger, if my grip on the army was not only about defense, but about ambition. Let them wonder. Inside, the lesson was clear. The army was no longer an independent force. It was my force. And those who led it knew that as long as I stood, they would stand. If I fell, so would they. The bond was sealed not in trust, not in love, but in necessity. And necessity is often stronger than affection. Even so, I never forgot the truth I learned in exile. Power is always fragile. Today's loyalist can be tomorrow's traitor. Today's shield can become tomorrow's blade. That is why I kept the knife sharp. That is why purges did not end but continued, wave after wave, each reminding the ranks that vigilance was eternal. Some asked silently, how long could this go on? How long could one man keep the army under such discipline, such fear, such control? The answer was simple. As long as I remained, the discipline would remain. Because the army does not serve rules, it does not serve tradition, it does not serve history. It serves only the hand strong enough to command it, and in that hand I held not only the party, not only the people, but now the sword as well, which meant the path ahead was no longer just about surviving rivals or cleansing corruption. It was about something larger. It was about reshaping the very vision of what the nation could become. But visions carry shadows, and the larger the vision, the deeper the shadow it casts. The weight of power is not only carried in silence and shadow, it is carried in words, in speeches, in directives, in the stories that ripple outward through the people. For power to endure, it must be spoken into existence, again and again, until it becomes not just authority but inevitability. I learned this truth early. To lead is not only to command, but to define the narrative. And so when I had carved my path through rivals, when I had disciplined the party and bound the army close, I turned to something subtler. Messaging, the words chosen, the directives given, the ideas planted in the minds of millions, repeated until they echoed back to me. There was a phrase I began to use often, turn the knife inward, a reminder that the greatest dangers were not from outside, but from within. I spoke of corruption as though it were a sickness that never ended, of the need for vigilance, for endless self-examination. Outwardly, it was a call for purity. Inwardly, it was a warning. Every official who heard those words knew what they meant. The knife was always sharp. The knife could turn toward anyone. Then there was another word I brought into the open, involution. A strange word for many, one that spoke of endless, destructive competition. I told the nation we must resist it, that we must step away from the frenzy that devours itself. Factories, schools, offices, everywhere people were grinding, competing, clawing for survival, but not always producing strength. I declared it time to change, to move away from the outdated, to let old capacity die and make room for the new. To the people, it was guidance. To the officials, it was a command. And to me, it was a way of reshaping the rhythm of the nation's economy, bending it toward the future I envisioned. But words are never enough on their own. They must be delivered with precision, carried by repetition, embedded in the very fabric of life. That is why I made sure my words were written into textbooks, studied in schools, printed in newspapers, and broadcast across every channel. They called it thought, my thought. They repeated it until it became doctrine, until students could recite it as easily as they breathed. In time, it was no longer just policy, it was truth. And yet, for all the words I spoke, for all the messages I crafted, silence carried its own weight. There were moments when I disappeared from the public eye, when no speeches came, when no images appeared. Days stretched into weeks and the whispers began. Where is he? Has something happened? Has the balance shifted? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said I had been removed, others that I was ill, others still that the party had turned against me. I did not correct them. Rumor is a tool. Silence feeds it. And sometimes silence is more powerful than denial. While they whispered, while they speculated, they revealed themselves. Rivals leaned too far forward, allies grew too anxious, outsiders exposed their desires. My absence became a test. Who remained loyal when they thought I had fallen? Who plotted to move against me? Who waited silently for my return? And when I did return, the rumors collapsed in on themselves. Those who had doubted now bent even lower. Those who had whispered now spoke only in praises. The silence had cleansed the air, revealing who was steady and who was not. But rumors are never fully silenced. They always return. Each absence sparks another wave. Each reshuffle of leadership, each sudden disappearance of a general or official becomes fodder for speculation. Some say I am slipping. Some say I am losing grip. Some even whisper that the very system I have bound so tightly may turn against me one day, perhaps. But I've learned that power thrives not in certainty. If they fear I may fall, they cling tighter. If they fear I may disappear, they wait more obediently for my return. Fear, like silence, is not an enemy, it is an ally. Still, the world outside watches these rumors closely. Observers beyond my borders hunger for signs of weakness. They seize on every disappearance, every change, every stumble in the economy, and declare it the beginning of the end. They do not understand. I was declared finished long ago as a boy in exile living in mud and shadows. And yet I survived. What could possibly undo me now that I have risen beyond limits? Even so, I know the truth that others do not speak aloud. Power is not eternal. It must be renewed constantly, guarded endlessly, spoken into being every day. One directive, one speech, one reshuffle is never enough. The work never ends. And if I falter, even for a moment, the system I command could turn, just as it has for so many others before me. That is why the purges never end. That is why the messaging never ceases. That is why silence is as calculated as speech. Every absence is chosen. Every return is timed. Every word is sharpened like a blade. Because I know the cost of losing control. I know what it is to be cast out, to live in a cave, to be forgotten, humiliated, branded as nothing. That memory has never left me. It follows me like a shadow, reminding me every day what I must never allow again. And so, when they whisper that I am weakening, I smile in silence. When they speculate about my fall, I let them. Because I know the truth. Power is not only in the hand that wields it. Power is in the mind that controls the story. The story they tell of me is always shifting. Ruthless leader, reformer, tyrant, savior. It changes, depending on who speaks. But the one story they never tell, the one they cannot tell, is of my end. Because that ending has not yet come. And until it does, every rumor, every absence, every directive is just another chapter in a tale that is still being written. A tale that belongs to me. But in fear, a nation does not move forward on discipline alone. Fear may secure obedience, but it cannot inspire. Rules may bind men, but they cannot stir the soul. To endure, power must be more than authority. It must become a belief. I understood this truth as I rose. To command millions, I had to become more than a man in office. I had to come up with an idea, something larger than flesh, larger than time, something that could not be dismissed as ordinary. And so, step by step, I began to shape the narrative. My words were not only policies, they were visions. My thoughts were not only instructions, they were doctrine. Schools began to study them, repeating them as lessons. Universities dissected them as philosophy. Newspapers carried them daily. Television broadcast them endlessly. Slowly, the line between governance and belief blurred. They began to call it my thought. Not just leadership, but thought itself. A framework for how the nation should act, how it should dream, how it should see the world. It was written into textbooks, embedded in the Constitution, carved into the marrow of the state. Children recited it. Teachers taught it. Officials quoted it. And in every repetition, my presence grew. Some called it indoctrination. Others called it guidance. I knew it was both. For what is belief if not repetition until doubt fades? I cultivated the image carefully. Not too distant, not too close. Appearances with the people, dressed as one of them, smiling gently, speaking simply. Visits to villages, to factories, to schools, every gesture captured, broadcast, repeated. Each image told the story I wanted them to see. A leader, both ordinary and extraordinary, humble yet indispensable. But behind that carefully crafted humility was something else. Inevitability. The more they saw me, the more they studied my words, the more they felt there could be no future without me. And this is how power truly embeds itself. Not through force, not through decree, but through belief that the leader is the nation, and the nation is the leader. Still, I knew belief is fragile. It must be nurtured constantly. That is why my vision stretched beyond borders. I spoke not only of domestic reform, but of rejuvenation, of restoring the nation to its rightful place in the world. I called it a dream, a revival, a destiny. It gave shape to sacrifice. It gave meaning to obedience. For what is endurance without purpose? What is loyalty without vision? The dream I offered was not just prosperity, but greatness. Not just stability, but strength that could not be ignored. To the people, it was hope. To the officials, it was direction. To the world beyond, it was a warning. And the world did watch. Some admired, others feared. They saw a nation rising, driven not by chaos but by a single will. They wondered whether this was revival or domination. They debated whether my vision was for harmony or for supremacy. They argued endlessly, but in the end their words changed nothing. The direction had already been set, yet with each step into this era that bore my mark, I felt the shadows deepen. For the larger the vision, the greater the risks. The more the people believed in me, the less room there was for failure. When you are ordinary, failure is survivable. When you are inevitable, failure is unthinkable. And so every decision carried a weight beyond its surface. Each policy was no longer just governance, it was proof that the dream was real. I carried that weight in silence. Outwardly I smiled, I spoke of certainty, of destiny, of unshakable faith. Inwardly I knew that belief must be fed constantly, that doubt must be crushed before it spreads. That is why purges did not end. That is why messaging never ceased. That is why even the smallest dissent was treated as contagion. Because when a leader becomes the embodiment of the nation, his survival and the nation's survival become one. Some critics abroad whispered of cults of personality, drawing comparisons to shadows of the past. They looked at my portraits, my slogans, my doctrines, and said history was repeating itself. But they did not understand. This was not imitation. This was adaptation. The world had changed, the tools had changed, but the principle remained the same. Power must be believed in, or it will not last. And so I embraced it. My face became symbol, my words became mantra, my vision became creed. Not because I craved worship, but because I understood necessity. Without belief, there is only fear. And fear alone is brittle. The people, many of them, accepted this with ease. After all, what is easier than following a vision already written? What is more comforting than believing that someone else has already charted the course? To follow is less exhausting than to lead. To believe is less painful than to doubt. And so they believed. In this belief, my authority expanded beyond politics. I was no longer merely a leader. I was the vision itself. The present and the future intertwined in my words, my gestures, my silence. But in the quiet hours, I asked myself, what happens when belief becomes too heavy? What happens when the vision outgrows the man who created it? That is the paradox of power. To survive, I had to become an idea. But once an idea takes root, it demands endless growth. It must be repeated, expanded, reinforced until it fills every corner. If it falters, if it cracks, the collapse will not be of a man, but of the nation tied to him. This is the burden I carry. This is the cost of inevitability. And though the world speculates endlessly about my fate, though they whisper of instability, of challenge, of rebellion, they do not see the truth. The truth is that belief, once anchored deeply enough, is harder to uproot than fear. Because fear ends when the hand loosens. But belief endures even in silence. And in that silence, the era that bears my mark continues to unfold. Power within borders is never enough. A leader who only looks inward soon discovers that the walls of his nation cannot keep the world out. Pressure seeps through trade, diplomacy, war, and whispers carried on the winds of global markets. To survive, one must not only govern the inside, but command the shadows outside. From the beginning, I knew the world would not welcome my rise. To some, my nation was too large, too restless, too ambitious. They had grown comfortable with their own dominance, convinced that the future would always bend to their image. My presence unsettled them, my vision threatened them, my silence disturbed them. And so they began to watch me with suspicion. Every move I made at home was echoed abroad. Every purge, every reform, every directive became evidence to them of something larger, an ambition not just for my people, but for the balance of the world itself. Perhaps they were right. I saw the global order for what it was, a structure built long before my time, designed to keep certain nations above and others below. My country had once been brought low, humiliated, divided by powers that fed on its weakness. That memory still runs deep in our veins, and I knew that to truly restore strength, I could not accept a world where others dictated our place. So I began to move carefully, weaving strength not only through armies and economies, but through influence. Trade routes expanded, projects rose across continents, loans and investments bound distant lands to us. Some saw roads and ports. I saw corridors of power stretching like veins from our heart into the world. They called it strategy. They called it expansion. I called it renewal. The nations that once dismissed us as imitators now found themselves dependent. They needed our markets, our resources, our partnerships. They could no longer ignore the weight of our presence. And in that shifting balance, the whispers grew. Was I building merely prosperity, or was I weaving a net that one day they would not escape? The truth, as always, lies in both. But power abroad does not come without challenge. Rivalries sharpened. Across oceans, leaders spoke my name with caution, sometimes with fear, sometimes with hostility. They tried to contain me, to encircle me, to paint me as a threat. They built alliances meant to keep me at bay, military pacts designed to remind me of their strength. I did not flinch. Containment is an old game. It is played with force, but it is also played with patience, and patience has always been my weapon. At times, storms erupted. Trade wars, sanctions, confrontations on the seas. Each episode was framed as a test of resolve. Each clash was a reminder that the world would not let me rise quietly. But I had not risen quietly at home, and I would not shrink abroad. To my people, I spoke of rejuvenation, of destiny, of restoring dignity stolen in centuries past. To the world, I spoke of cooperation, of mutual growth, of shared futures. Yet beneath those words was something sharper, a refusal to bow. I would not allow another nation to dictate my path, nor would I let their suspicions shape my vision. And so the shadows lengthened. Across Asia, across Africa, across distant oceans, my presence stretched. Investments, soldiers, diplomats, engineers, each carried a fragment of the vision outward. And the world grew restless. Some nations leaned toward me willingly, drawn by opportunity. Others resisted, clinging to old alliances. But whether they welcomed me or feared me, they could no longer ignore me. Rumors followed even here. Whispers of hidden ambitions, of secret designs, of plans that reached far beyond what I admitted aloud. Some accused me of building not partnership, but empire. Others whispered that my nation's rise was unstoppable, that no alliance could contain it. I let the rumors spread. Rumor is as useful abroad as it is at home. It unsettles, it divides, it forces rivals to question each other. A world uncertain of my intentions is a world less certain of how to resist me. But even as I projected strength outward, I knew that shadows abroad are fragile. Global power is a stage where every move is watched, every word analyzed, every silence dissected. A stumble at home can ripple outward, magnified into weakness abroad. That is why my grip within remains relentless. Because a leader who falters inside his own borders cannot hope to command respect beyond them. There were moments when I sensed the weight of all these eyes, watching, waiting, hoping for cracks. When the economy slowed, they said it was my weakness. When generals disappeared, they said it was my instability. When I vanished from view, they said it was my end. But they forget. I was declared finished long ago, in exile, in mud, in hunger. And yet, I endured. If I could rise from nothing, why should I fall now when I command everything? Still, I do not deceive myself. The higher one climbs, the greater the winds. The larger the vision, the sharper the resistance. Every gain abroad invites a counterweight. Every corridor of influence invites suspicion. I have built a web, but webs can be torn. And so vigilance never ends. I remind myself often, the world is not yet mine to shape. It is contested, chaotic, shifting like the tides. I cannot command it as I command my halls, but I can bend it, push it, test its edges. And little by little, I have. Some nights, I reflect on how far the shadows now stretch. From the silence of a cave dwelling in Shanxi to the corridors of global power, from exile to influence on every continent. The boy who once shoveled dung now speaks, and the world listens, even if it listens with suspicion. But suspicion is not defeat. Suspicion is acknowledgement, and acknowledgement is the first step toward inevitability. The world has not yet accepted my vision, but it cannot deny it, and in time denial fades, because power, once established, demands recognition, even from those who swore they would never give it, and so I continue. Quietly, relentlessly, weaving the threads of a future where my nation stands unbowed, where my vision shapes not just the present, but the order of the world itself. They may resist, they may whisper, they may fear, but they will not forget me. And in the end, memory is the first form of victory. History remembers in fragments, faces, words, decisions. Some fade, others linger, but only a few become so deeply bound to their time that the era itself bears their shadow. I have lived long enough to know which of these paths is mine. I began with nothing but the weight of a disgraced name, a boy cast into exile, shoveling dung in the mud of Shanxi, sleeping in a cave carved from earth. They told me I was finished before I had begun. They whispered that humiliation would bury me, that the party would never take me back, that I was destined to fade into silence. But silence became my refuge. Obscurity became my armor. Rejection became my discipline. I waited, I endured, I sharpened myself until the moment came to rise. And when it came, I did not stumble. Province by province, step by careful step, I ascended. My rivals, louder and hungrier, burned too quickly. I was patient. I let them believe I was ordinary, that I would never matter. They did not see the fire beneath the mask. They did not understand that invisibility is the most dangerous weapon of all. When at last I reached the summit, I struck. Corruption, purged. Rivals, erased. The army, bound. The rules themselves torn down. My presence expanded beyond politics into vision, into doctrine, into inevitability. My words became lessons, my image a symbol, my thought a creed. And yet, I have always known the fragility of power. I have seen men fall overnight. I have lived through betrayals that shattered families, through whispers that devoured reputations. That is why I never rest. That is why vigilance never ceases. That is why, even in silence, I am listening. Rumors follow me still. They say I have vanished. They say I have fallen. They say my era is ending. They do not know that rumor itself is my ally. Rumor tests the faithful, exposes the disloyal, unsettles the world. I return when I choose, and every return silences the doubters once more. But even I cannot ignore the truth. I am mortal. Flesh withers. Time presses forward. No leader rules forever, no matter how tightly he binds himself to the system, no matter how deeply he embeds himself in belief. Someday, whether by choice or by force, the cycle will shift again. And yet, I have secured something that reaches beyond me. My name is etched not only in laws but in the minds of millions. My thought is written into books, carved into memory, repeated in classrooms. Even if flesh fails, the idea remains. The doctrine endures. That is the closest any man can come to immortality. Still, I wonder, what will history say of me? Will it speak of stability, of strength, of revival? Will it whisper of fear, of control, of shadows? Or will it, as history often does, remember only fragments, shards of truth, sharpened into myth? Perhaps it will not matter. History bends not to accuracy, but to narrative, and I have spent my life mastering the narrative. I began this story without giving you my name. Perhaps you have already guessed. Perhaps the fragments have revealed enough. A boy born in 1953, exiled to the countryside during the Cultural Revolution, who rose from obscurity to command the party, the army, and the nation. A leader who tore down term limits, who bound belief to his words, who stretched influence across the world. Yes, you know now. I am Xi Jinping, and this is not merely my story. It is the story of an era, an age defined by my presence, an age that will one day be spoken of as the Xi era. The boy they once dismissed as broken became the man who rewrote the rules. The exile became the ruler. The silence became the voice that filled a nation. But the story is not finished. Even now, as whispers of instability spread, as rivals dream of my fall, as the world imagines a future without me, I remain. I stand at the center, the weight of 1 billion souls pressing upon my shoulders. I do not know when the end will come. None of us do, but I know this. When it comes, it will not erase me. My shadow will remain long after my footsteps fade. My thought, my vision, my presence, woven into the fabric of a nation that cannot separate itself from me. That is the legacy I have built. That is the immortality I have claimed. And as you drift now into sleep, carried by this story, remember, power is never truly about the man. It is about the memory, and my memory will not vanish. Not in your time, not in theirs, not ever. Stories from the past are never only about the past. They ripple forward, brushing against the lives of those who hear them. My journey, filled with exile, silence, patience, and endurance, is not only about politics or nations. It is also about what it means to survive when the world seems determined to break you. Tonight, as you listen, perhaps you recognize pieces of yourself in the story. Perhaps you have faced rejection that stung like fire, or moments when the doors you knocked on stayed closed. Perhaps you too have felt invisible, unseen by those who should have recognized your worth. If so, then you know the quiet strength it takes to persist. The world today moves faster than ever. Decisions are expected instantly, success measured in days, failure broadcast in seconds. It is easy to believe that patience no longer has a place, that silence is weakness, that endurance has been forgotten. But my story is proof that these old truths remain unshakable. The world may change its tools, but the core of survival does not change. Endurance still outlasts brilliance. Patience still defeats haste. Silence, when chosen carefully, is still louder than noise. Think of your own life. The struggles you carry may not involve armies or governments, but they are no less real. Work that drains you, relationships that test you, ambitions that seem always out of reach. These are the battlefields of ordinary life. And on these fields the same lessons apply. To bend without breaking, to wait without despair, to remain steady when others stumble. There is power in choosing not to quit, power in enduring when the world says you are finished, power in allowing rejection to shape you instead of destroy you. So as you rest now, let this story settle into you not as a tale of distant politics, but as a reminder of your own quiet strength. Let it whisper to you that every setback can be fuel, every silence can be strategy, every moment of invisibility can be preparation. You do not need to move quickly to matter. You do not need to be seen constantly to be powerful. Sometimes the greatest victories belong to those who wait the longest, who endure the most, who sharpen themselves in shadows until the moment arrives. And when that moment comes, whether it is in your work, your dreams, your struggles, you will know that the years of patience were never wasted. They were the foundation. So breathe deeply now. Let the lessons of endurance, silence, and patience move through you like a calm tide. Let go of the day's noise, the rushing thoughts, the weight of doubt. You are safe here, listening, learning, resting. Tomorrow will come, as it always does. Challenges will return, as they always do. But tonight, you carry something new. You carry the reminder that survival itself is strength, that patience is not weakness, that silence can be the sharpest weapon. Close your eyes. Let the story fade into quiet. Let sleep take you, steady and calm, because endurance is not only a path to power, it is also a path to peace.